Okay, so good morning. Thank you for being here. We are going to start presenting the nature of speaking. When we talk about the nature of speaking, we need to remember what is speaking. In this case, it's a ability, a skill that implies production of ideas in the oral form. Those ideas, obviously, we need to remember that they are bound to a context. However, the ideas needs to be structured in a logical and sequential manner. So, in order to start teaching speaking, first of all, we need to question what is involved in speaking. So, to begin with, speech production takes place in real time, as here we are doing in this moment, and especially is linear. In what sense is linear? Well, follow words and phrases follow phrases. Likewise, at the level of utterance, the spoken equivalent of a sentence, speech is produced utterance by utterance in response to the word by word and utterance by utterance production of the person we are talking to. And the person we are talking to is known as the interlocutor. So remember, when we write, we are just with ourselves, but we are in this case, expressing by the written form our ideas, but the channel of communication is a Word document in the electronic form or a sheet of paper. Now, when we are talking about speaking, the channel of communication in this case is, for instance, in this moment, is throughout just the sounds of my voice that I'm producing. So, in this case, another aspect that needs to be taken into consideration with the nature of speaking is turn. A turn is the duration of one speaker's contribution to the talk before yielding to or being interrupted by another speaking. So, when we are teaching speaking, we need also to teach our students how to take turns, when to finish their turn, and as well how to involve another person who wants to speak. Then, another aspect related to the nature of speaking is conceptualization and formulation. Speakers conceptualize a topic or a talk in terms of its discourse type. For instance, if they are giving a description, if it is a story, or if it is a narrative discourse. Additionally, speakers conceptualize the topic they are going to talk about the purpose, what is the intended audience, why that audience is going to listen to the speaker. Additionally, speakers formulate the speech. By formulation, we mean that speakers make strategic choices at the level of discourse, syntax, and vocabulary. Although we are not really aware about syntax as we are when we are writing, when we elaborate a discourse, we also need to think about the kind of words, how we are going to accommodate those words, and of course, to what level of register we are going to employ so that our intended audience can really understand what we are producing. So, at the level of overall discourse, stories, for instance, have a typical structure or script. Each of the stages of a script needs to be fleshed out at the utterance level. What does that mean? When we are producing that discourse, probably we need to write the script of that discourse. We also need to start choosing not only the words and how we are going to arrange, but the impact those words, those phrases may provoke on the interlocutor. In this case, people who are going to hear us. Then at the formulation stage, the words need to be assigned their pronunciation. This will also include the individual sounds of the words and the appropriate placement of prominence. In this case, appropriate placement of prominence is known as stress and the meaningful use of information. The idea of meaningful use of information is also known as pitch direction. Those suprasegmental aspects of language, stress, and pitch direction are part of the pronunciation stage. However, when we are teaching speaking, we need also to take into consideration those aspects of pronunciation. Nevertheless, we need to consider as a whole, not as its separate component parts. Then the other element of the nature of speaking is articulation. Articulation involves the use of organs of speech to produce sounds. In this case, vocal cords, mouth, tongues, teeth, and how we are going to place the tongue against the teeth, how we are going to articulate probably nasal sounds, and all those aspects. The combined effect of all variables that I mentioned allows speakers of English to produce a range of over around 40 phonemes. In this case, sounds that in English determine the meaning of a word. That's another aspect, articulation, that we need to consider with the nature of speaking because it's closely related with pronunciation. How we are going to help our students to correct their pronunciation, to rehearse so they can transmit the adequate meaning. Remember that there are some words that only the pronunciation may vary if you are talking about a verb or if you are talking about a noun. In fact, remember that sounds are produced in a continuous stream with many different vocal organs involved concurrently, such as the articulation of its neighbors. What does that mean? When we are producing different words, we need to change immediately the place of articulation. That's why when we are teaching speaking, obviously we need to reinforce aspects of pronunciation, but again, not as an isolated aspect. We need to take part of the speech production, such as helping our students to correct some words that were not really well pronounced and making them aware how they can correct the pronunciation by stressing some aspects of place of articulation, how some sounds, remember, this is something that you as language learners, you really know, the place of articulation will vary. Some words, sorry, some letters are mute, some other will be pronounced. This is something that you need also to make your students aware why some letters are mute, why other letters are stressed. The other aspect is strategies of self-monitoring and repair communication breakdowns. This is a process that happens concurrently with the stages of conceptualization, formulation, and articulation. Why? Because when you are speaking and then you are aware that some words are not really well articulated, you stop and say, well, what I mean, and this is a strategy to rephrase, reformulate, or probably to say, well, sorry, what I was trying to say is this is another process, self-monitoring and repair at the same time that communication breakdown. In this case, a rethink at the planning stage may result in the abandonment of the message altogether, as when someone starts to gossip and realizes that the subject of the gossip is within hearing distance. It's just like a comparative example. In this case, self monitoring and repairing as a strategy for enhancing your communication. Obviously, this other nature of speaking, this part, self monitoring and repair, should also be taught at the same time students are producing their messages. Why? Well, definitely because that's the opportunity students have to be conscious of how to solve that communication breakdown. Another aspect that students need to be aware about the nature of speaking is automaticity. Automaticity allows speakers to focus their attention on the aspect of the speaking task that immediately requires it, whether it is planning or articulation. What does that mean? In this case, remember that there are some fixed expressions that students can use to keep on thinking and producing and articulating their speech. Probably this is something that at the beginning students will experience like something difficult, obviously because they don't have enough practice. Nevertheless, you as teachers will guide students to provide that guidance in terms of try to follow my example, students. When I'm thinking about to describe, for instance, my daily routine, I previously know some vocabulary, but in order to give that oral description of my daily routine, what I need to think is the use of some sequential words. And then when you are trying to remember some vocabulary, some actions that you included in your daily routine, and you are about to forget that, you can use this strategy like, well, additionally, I also, and then this is something automatic that you learner need to employ so that you are the moment of producing that fixed expression, you are also trying to remember the word or the activity in this case because we are talking about daily routine activities. That's exactly how you are going to fill that space, and at the same time, you are going to make an effort to remember the word, the activity that you were about to mention. Then, another aspect related to the nature of speaking is fluency. When we talk about someone as being as fluent a speaker of a certain language, we may refer to some aspects. First, speed, how speed is produced the speech. Additionally, pausing, when, how often speakers make some pauses, what's the purpose of making those pauses. Additionally, how proficient speakers need to stop in this case, when they are reformulating, when they are trying to introduce a new idea, or probably when they want to allow the interlocutor to interact. Then, frequent pausing, in contrast, is a sure sign of a struggling speaker. That's the counterpart of making pauses. Also, is important the appropriate placement of pauses. Natural sounding pauses are those that occur at the intersection of clauses or after group words that form a meaningful unit. But if you notice that your student make a lot of pauses, this is a sign that student is not ready to speak. And of course, you need to make students aware that when they are not really prepared for speaking, they need to practice before. Then, if they practice before and they start struggling, the other aspect that you need to make them aware is to feel calm. Obviously, at the first moment they are going to speak, they will be nervous. Nevertheless, you will also provide with some strategies to calm down, not to feel stressed. And then one of the strategies that you will provide your students is the use of fillers, pause fillers like and then sometimes another fillers is the use of vagueness expressions like kind of, sort of, and all those pause fillers are a good strategy that students can employ. However, when they are producing language for an oral test, and depending on the nature of that oral test, students need to learn how to use strategically that pause fillers. Otherwise, they are not going to be graded in a good way because they are employing more pause fillers than producing authentic language. Then, the other aspect that we need to consider is how to manage a talk. When we talk about managing talk, it's established interaction. When we are in a monologue, for instance, the one that I'm giving in this moment, most speakers adjust the delivery to take into account the responses of their audience. For instance, in this moment, I'm going to make you some questions. For instance, what do you think is the most difficult part of speaking? With your examples, with your vivid examples. Any one of you, you can tell me in English or Spanish. What do you think about these elements that we are reviewing? What do you think is the most difficult part of speaking for you? Anyone, please?
In my opinion, um, it has been the articulation, the to pronounce well some words, because in English there are specific pronunciation that doesn't exist in Spanish.
Definitely, and this is something that we as native speakers of Spanish, we need to rehearse a lot for articulating the best way some English sounds, all right? And exactly with our vivid experience is how we also enhance students to practice, to reshape their way of pronouncing some words. Thank you so much, Fanny. Evelyn, go ahead.
I think the most difficult for me is fluency because we can relate it with our mother tongue to maybe to to think that it's similar and to achieve that fluency. But I think it's difficult to beginners because you have to formulate, maybe translate at the moment. So I think it's the most difficult for me.
Yes, exactly. Also, fluency implies not only to speak fast, but in this case, that the ideas flows in a neat, orderly fashion, and as well that you are not making a lot of pauses, unnecessary pauses. That's exactly the other aspect. So, based on your own experience, you can also provide your students with some strategies for producing a fluent speech, but make them aware that fluency is not exactly to be able to speak fast. No, fluent speaking is that the string of words, in this case, the flow of ideas, have coherence, cohesion, that they make pauses when necessary, that they are able to reshape some ideas that are not really well produced. Thank you so much for your examples. Now, another aspect of managing a talk is turn taking. In this case, you also face this aspect of turn taking. In this virtual environment, you raise your virtual hand and then you have that turn. When we are on the face to face space, we are also using, well, raise our physical hand, but at the same time, we can also ask for permission, something like, well, can I go first? Yes, go ahead. Thank you. Now, can I go? Yes, go ahead. So this is how we are taking turns. The skills by means of which these rules I've observed include recognizing the appropriate moment to get a turn, signaling the fact that you want to speak, holding the floor while you have your turn, yielding the turn, signaling the fact that you are listening. Those aspects, although are not really recommendable to teach them separately, sometimes it's really necessary that you make your students aware how they are going to take turns, how they are going to show they are listening to the speaker, and then how they are going to make sense at the moment they are speaking with their turn, how they are going to make sense of their ideas in order not to sound vague, not well structured, and inappropriate for the context. Then the other aspect are paralinguistic elements. Paralinguistic elements are related to negotiation of speaking turns. During a speaking turn, little head nods from listeners tend to encourage speakers to speak faster, but if someone stands with their arm crossed, most speakers slow down. What does that mean? There are some facial gestures, body movements that may indicate for the speaker to speed up, to slow down, or probably to finish the intervention. Those paralinguistic aspects are not, how can I say, are not taught separately. They need to be taught at the moment of interaction. And of course, since it's a pedagogical aspect, you in advance need to make your students aware that when speaking in public, there are some aspects that they need to be also aware. Nevertheless, you as a teacher will make different interruptions in some speaking exercises for make them aware when they need to finish, if they need to hurry up, if they need to slow down the speed of their voice. So these aspects are known as paralinguistics, and students need to be conscious those aspects will also be present in a daily life discourse, oral discourse production. Okay, so now there are some aspects that should be reviewed and that are considered to make speaking difficult. Those aspects are known as clustering, redundancy, the use of reduced forms, performance variables, colloquial language, rate of delivery, stress, rhythm and intonation, and of course, interaction. Let's try to review one by one. Clustering. Clustering when speech is phrasal, not word by word. Remember that students need to organize their output by thinking in advance to whom they are going to talk, the content they are going to express, and of course, some other aspects as body language, facial gestures that they are going to use at the moment of producing their speech. That is exactly clustering, those three aspects. Second, redundancy. Speaker has an opportunity to make meaning clearer through the redundancy of language. In this case, to repeat some ideas but using equivalent words. The other aspect, reduced forms. When we're speaking, we use lots of contractions, also elisions and reduced vowels. That's a moment when you need to make aware that there is one word written and that word when it's joined in a spoken production, probably the word contains a letter that it's going to be elide, so it's not produced. And of course, another words that contains some vowels, probably the sound of the vowel when it's joined with another word is going also to be omitted. That's exactly how you are going to make students aware of reduced forms. The other aspect is performance variables. One of the advantages of spoken language is that the process of thinking as you speak allows you to manifest a certain number of performance hesitation, pauses, and corrections. Learners need to be able to develop those aspects as a strategy for producing an oral speech. Then, students need to be conscious of the use of colloquial language. Make sure your students are reasonably well acquainted with words, idiom, colloquial phrases. The other aspect is the rate of delivery. Rate of delivery is like how students uh, probably last when they are producing a short speech. That's the moment in which you can use this kind of exercise for measuring how many how much time they spend producing just a couple of sentences. If they last more than 1 minute, that's quite problematic. Why? Because students need also to start practicing to speak faster. It's not only the fact of being able to speak faster, but if you produce a really short discourse and it takes you 2 minutes, this is quite not acceptable in terms of rate and speed of oral production. Remember that students need also to develop this skill of being able to speak concisely, but not to take a lot of time speaking information that can be delivered in a really short amount of time. Then stress, rhythm, and intonation. This is the most important characteristic of English pronunciation. The stress, time, rhythm of spoken English and its intonation patterns convey important messages. That's why sometimes we need to practice exactly those pronunciation exercises so they can have like that aspect of a fluent speech. Why it's necessary that students are aware of the stress, rhythm, and intonation patterns? Well, to sound like a native speaker, but not just for that sake, rather, for being able to transmit without any complication the message they want to say. And finally, interaction. Learning to produce waves of language in a vacuum without instructors would rob speaking skills of its richest component. In what sense? Well, interaction implies enhancing students' confidence to exchange ideas with the interlocutor and at the same time learning how to ask from the interlocutor a response. For instance, we are going to make it in this moment. From all these aspects that we have reviewed about speaking, what do you consider is the most difficult for you in your learning English experience and why? Any one of you, you can tell me in English or Spanish. Any one of you? Which of these aspects do you consider it's the most difficult or has been the most difficult for you when speaking in English? And why? No one else?
Well, in my opinion, I think that stress, rhythm, and intonation is the most difficult because um, there are certain mm, ways to pronounce specific words, and also because there are specific sounds that um, even the native speakers pronounce in not the most fluently way, or the most um, how can I say it, um, right way. So it could be a little bit difficult knowing how to pronounce certain phrases, words, and things like that.
Thank you so much, Fanny. Especially what you mentioned is something very crucial because we need to be, as language users, to be conscious how we have experienced those difficulties. So now, with our role as teachers, can provide students with some vivid examples of how they can solve those possible difficulties. Thank you so much, Fanny, for your comment. So, based on that ideas, it's moment to review those pedagogical principles for teaching speaking. Those pedagogical principles are a set of, if we can say, mm, principles, ideas, probably some vivid experiences that should be considered when we are designing the speaking activity or when we are considering the type of speaking activity to be included in our lesson plan. First, use techniques that cover all the spectrum of learner needs, from language-based focus on accuracy to message-based focus on interaction, meaning, and fluency. This first pedagogical principle uh, makes you as teachers to consider to what extent I'm just going to focus on a speaking activity that enhances students' communicative skills, but I'm not really focusing on accuracy aspects, or the other way around. I'm going to decide to use a really controlled speaking activity in which just students need to change some words of a conversation model, but the idea is that they develop accuracy in pronunciation. It should have a balance, and that balance can be obtained at the moment of listening your students. If you consider and if you say, well, most of my students are doing well in pronouncing, I need to move more for a productive activity in which students probably design their own um, conversation. But if I apply the activity and I see most of my students are struggling with pronunciation, no, I need to emphasize more on accuracy activities. That's how you can have that balance. Principle number two, provide intrinsically motivating techniques. Try at all times to appeal students' ultimate goals and interest to their need for knowledge, for status, for achieving competence and autonomy. In this case, intrinsically motivating techniques implies that students feel confident with what they are producing orally, with how they are using speaking strategies for solving communication breakdowns, for making them clear when stating an idea. Number three, encourage the use of authentic language in meaningful context. This is possible when your students demonstrate you that they are producing language without much difficulty. And obviously, the use of authentic language is vital for them for producing the spoken discourse. Nevertheless, remember that you are not going to ask that they produce a spontaneous discourse if they do not demonstrate you that they have kind of mastery for producing, articulating ideas, articulating also sounds in a proper manner. Number four, provide appropriate feedback and correction. In ESL situation, English as a second language situation, they may get such feedback out there beyond the classroom, but even then, you are in a position to be of great benefit. So, when you are going to provide feedback for speaking, not at the moment of speaking, but after. This is true when your student have mastery of sounds, when your students demonstrate that the only possible mistake they are making is just in the selection, in the use of some words, or probably the mistake is based on how they are articulating some ideas. This is true for intermediate and so on language level students. Now, with beginners, the recommendation is that the first time they are producing, let them produce. Obviously, they are going to make their best effort, but they are not going to produce a perfect speech. Then the moment for you to give feedback is after, immediately after they have finished their oral intervention. And it's tremendously important for beginners and elementary students to be correct immediately at the moment, sorry, after the moment they have produced their speech. Why? Because we need to avoid fossilization. At all cost, we need to avoid fossilization of bad habit formation, linguistic habits. And this is especially when they are learning to pronounce some words. Number five, capitalize on the natural link between speaking and listening. Many interactive techniques that involve speaking also include listening. For instance, you may begin your lesson by asking students to listen to a conversation. This is a conversation model. And then you review vocabulary, some grammar aspects. And after that, you may ask students to produce a conversation following the conversation model, and then they just need to substitute some words. This is how you are going to capitalize the link between speaking and listening. Number six, give students opportunities to initiate oral communication. A good deal of typical classroom interaction is characterized by teacher initiation of language. We ask questions, give directions, provide information, and students have been conditioned only to speak when spoken to. Nevertheless, you need to make students, in this case, to initiate language. So instead of you asking them to now let's talk about this and that, You may ask, okay, students, today you are going to decide the topic we are going to check this class. And then the idea is that you retrieve information of what topic they would like to be discussing class. Number 7, encourage the development of speaking strategies. Students simply have not thought about developing their own personal strategies for accomplishing oral communication. So, in this case, you can practice speaking strategies in your classroom. You can ask students to question for clarification, like, what does that mean? How can I say this in English? Asking someone to repeat something. Excuse me, can you repeat? Using fillers. I mean, well, in order to gain time to process information. Also, to enhance the use of conversation maintenance cues, like right. Oh, okay, yes. Using formulaic expressions. For instance, how much does something cost? The idea of using those pedagogical principles, it's like helping your students to feel secure when they are participating in oral activities. Now, the other part is how to teach speaking. There are different types of classroom speaking performance. The imitative performance, intensive, responsive performance, the transactional in the form of a dialogue, the interpersonal used in the form of a dialogue, and the extensive, the monologue. So let's review each one of them. The first one, that is imitative, we need to emphasize that a very limited portion of classroom speaking time may be legitimately be spent on generating human tape recorder speech. And what is human tape recorder speech? Well, students need to produce, well, reproduce what you have said, they need to repeat. That is the imitative part of speech. Produce chunks of language of different lengths, produce English stress patterns, produce fluent speech at different rates of delivery, use grammatical word classes, use cohesive devices in spoken discourse. This is These are some micro skills of imitative speaking. Exactly when you ask students, repeat after me. That is the imitative classroom speaking performance. Nevertheless, something that you need to consider with those drills, with those repetitions, are that they need to be short, they need to be simple, and that students need to know why they are doing the drill. This technique was taken also from the audiolingual method approach, the substitution drill, the chain drill, and all those type of drills that were reviewed in the audiolingual method approach. Sorry, audiolingual method. The idea of using drills needs to be clear. Students need to master accurate. That's the only purpose. Then intensive speaking goes one step beyond imitative to include any speaking performance that is designed to practice some phonological or grammatical aspect of language. Intensive speaking can be shaped in the form of conversation model, reproduce the conversation model. Number 3, responsive. A good deal of student speech in the classroom is responsive. Short replies to teachers' questions like, do I make me clear? Like, who brings the homework? Or the other is the other question that you as teacher initiate. Please tell me present or absent depending if you are here or not here. I'm going to call the roll. That's the responsive. Then the other, transactional in the form of a dialogue. Transactional dialogue carried out for the purpose of conveying or exchanging specific information is extended from of responsive language. Conversations, in this case, conversations that students need to create for asking for information. For instance, when you ask students, create a dialogue at the tourist office, create a dialogue in the hotel reception, something like that. This is a transactional dialogue. Number five, interpersonal dialogue. The other form of conversation is interpersonal dialogue, carried out more for the purpose of maintaining social relationships. For instance, in this case, when you ask students to create a dialogue for interviewing among themselves about their likes, dislikes, probably another dialogue in which students need to ask their classmates for their profession, nationality, their birthday, or something like that. These are more interpersonal conversations. Number six, extensive monologue. Students at intermediate or advanced levels, this is more recommendable for those language levels, are called on to give extended monologues in the form of oral reports, oral presentations, or short speeches. Here, the register is more formal and deliberative. These monologues can be planned or impromptu, but it's more used when students need to give an oral presentation or when they need to participate in a forum. All right, so far, I would like to listen if you have a question or please share with me something that have called your attention about these theoretical aspects that I have shared with you.
I found interesting the pedagogical principles because there are mm, like, suggestions we can follow, and I remember the feedback from my teachers, and uh, they have applied some of the principles, and I can say that that mm, feedback and their suggestions based on the principles have helped me in many ways. For example, when they use authentic language in some exercises, it's really helpful because that remember us as students that we use the language to communicate in the real world and not just in a classroom or for an exam.
It's something curious what you mentioned, Fanny, because you have noticed how your teachers, your professors have done those speaking strategies, and as well to what extent how can be considered useful for your speaking development. Therefore, you can also take advantage of that personal experience as a learner now when you become teacher to enhance your students' oral production. Thank you so much, Fanny, for your comment. Any one of you who would like to share something that you have considered interesting, something that probably you have listened to before, either in Spanish or in English, you can tell me. No one else? All right. So now we are going to review some types of interactive speaking activities. They are range from information gap activities, going from discussion activities, role plays, and we finish with games. So information gap activities can be considered as interactive activities. Why? Because you need to ask students to do something and at the same time they need to speak to describe, for instance, describe and draw. One learner has a picture and has to describe it to a partner who draws a picture. So one learner is giving the instructions to another partner to draw. Another interact information gap activity is describe and arrange. Learners have to arrange objects according to the instructions from a partner. The other is describe and identify. Learners have to identify which picture from a series of pictures is being described by their partner. Also, define the difference. In pairs, each learner has a similar picture but with some differences. They have to describe the pictures to each other in order to find the differences. And also asking for giving directions. Asking for giving directions implies that one learner has certain places marked on a map and the other learners has place different marked. In this case, you are enhancing students to interact, not only among themselves, but also with the teaching material. The other oral activity is discussion activities. Discussion activities give learners the chance to speak more freely and express themselves. They agrees, disagrees, probably what they like, dislike, what they thought. And some examples of discussion activities are surveys. Learners carry out a survey of their class or others on a topic of their choice. For example, how many people have pets and what kind of pets they have. Other are planning. For example, learners can be given an advertisement with information about plays, films, or tourist destinations. They can then be asked to decide on a program for a date or probably to what touristic place they would like to go. Discussion and solving problems. The functional situational drill for giving advice. You should, why don't we? If I were you, those expressions can be used for this discussion and solving problems. The other activity is the role plays, and these can be like mini dramas. Each learner is given a character and a card with some information on it, which can include information about their role and the situation. With other learner or in a group, they then have to act out a situation as if they were the people on the card. Remember, role plays are created by students, but they are just given some prompts in a card. Games. Finally, games are often useful to liven up a lesson. Some examples of a game giving speaking practice include 20 questions. The teacher thinks of a famous person. Learners have to ask yes no questions to find out who the famous person is. For example, is he a man? Yes. Can he sing? No. Learners can also play this game in groups. It's like the guess who. There's the 20 questions is similar to the guess who. All right. So in this moment, we have finished the teaching speaking. That is exactly how we have finished nature speaking, pedagogical principles for teaching speaking, and how to teach speaking, which is the purpose of this um, session to review those theoretical aspects.